This is a wonderful Currier knives. This is General Meade at Gettysburg, classic pose. I choose to call this Currier knives blue. They do it beautifully. That is classically with the troops in the background. Currier knives pictures of Civil War battles were flat, one-dimensional, unprofessional, and they should have never bothered. But they did great pictures of generals. This is, in my opinion, the most. This is the most accurate of Pickett's charge, or in this case, it's known as Longstreet's assault. You very seldom know that the artist Hall produced this thing because the arranger was Bachelder, who was an excellent topographer. And so everything here is accurate, right down to where these troops were, to the buttons and the rank on their lapels. Theoretically, someone was able to identify 400 of these people as being who the actual people were. It's the best, not the most exciting, but it's probably the best and the most accurate of Longstreet's assault. Not a great image here, but it's a great work. I show Cold Harbor. Ira Bernstein has lectured on this particular battle many times. It was, in Grant's own words, quote, the worst day of my career. Within 20 minutes, according to some scholars, 30 minutes, according to others, 7,500 Union troopers went down in the very first assault on the Confederate lines. As I have in a number of other cases, I've walked this battlefield, and yes, the Confederate trenches, this was a brand new thing, the Confederate trenches and the Union trenches were 20, 30, 40 feet apart. It wasn't a great place to be. The interesting thing about it tells you something about Grant's character. The very next day, where his troops would have ordinarily been told to move back, we just took a licking, we'll reform, we'll do it some other time, he kept them in place, he rode the line, and the troops cheered. Antietam. If James McPherson, I don't know if you'll give me a little poetic license here of James McPherson quotes. Antietam was unquestionably the most important battle of the Civil War, and then goes on to say on its impact on foreign relations. Never again did Britain and France come so close to intervention. Never again did the Confederacy come so close to recognition by foreign governments. In the Revolution, the Battle of Saratoga brought French intervention, which was the key to ultimate American victory. In the Civil War, Antietam turned out to be the Saratoga that failed. The South, that was the last real opportunity the South had to get either England and or France on their side. But this was the battle that there probably wasn't a very good chance that Lee was going to win this battle. I think he probably knew that. He fought it from a defensive posture, which he hated to do. The battle lasted one day. In that day, it accounted for the most American casualties, meaning on both sides, in any single day in any given Civil War battle. A few faux pas. These guys are all Union Army advancing. They're all crowded in on this bridge, which still stands there today, incidentally. The water in Antietam Creek was only belt or chest high. They could have moved a lot more people in a shorter period of time. However, nobody apparently tried it out. put their foot in the water, so to speak. Lee pulled back. The South claimed it a victory because the North didn't pursue. Lincoln, although we shall show this cabinet meeting on the next picture here, claimed it as a Union victory because the Confederates left the field. Lincoln was furious, absolutely furious. General McClellan, had a whole corps in reserve that he never chose to throw into the battle. So what happened was that Lee's army crossed the Potomac. They had their backs to the Potomac the whole way, went back to Virginia to fight another day. And then this is the cabinet meeting. The favorite cabinet picture, which I know all of you have seen. And please note, I have quoted William Seward, who was an abolitionist and a very outspoken one. He's in the center. Lincoln is not the central person. William Seward, Secretary of State is. And this is the proclamation. This was the first writing, incidentally, which was not the final writing. And Lincoln did all of this himself. He didn't have speechwriters. He sometimes consulted with his closest advisors, who might have been Staunton or Seward or Gideon Wells or one of these other people, but for the most part, he wrote his own stuff. And the first draft of the proclamation was not the same as the final draft. It had a lot more conditions in it. It was still reaching out to the South in terms of freeing slaves. The final copy of this thing, the one that they issued, and they only issued it because earlier in the summer, Seward had said, don't put this thing out on the street until we've done something on the field. Well, Antietam gave them that impetus to move forward on it. But this was an important moment in time, and the final document, we have it in a newspaper that I mentioned before, over in special collections. It's not a whole column long. You know, it's about this long. The Emancipation Proclamation you can read in a minute and a half. That it comes right to the point that those slaves held in states or counties that are still in rebellion shall be forever free. Of course, a lot of people think, well, gosh, what did that do? You're leaving out all those other people. Well, yeah, he did. But keep this in the back of your heads or in the front of your minds. Among other things, Lincoln was, excuse me, Ivor, the consummate political genius. Enough said. This is the Battle of Fredericksburg, and it represented one of the lowest days in Union arms. The losses were horrendous. Again, this is sort of showing us what's happening as they put the pontoon bridges down and literally tore the town apart. There were just a few skirmishers up here in front picking off a few of these people, but didn't really stop the bridges from going across. What was really happening was Lee was bringing his army that consisted of Stonewall Jackson's troops, which just came in at the last minute, and they were forming up here on Mary's Heights. And within the next 2 days, the toll that they took on these Union troopers was just absolutely awful. I show this also because it happens to be the most difficult of all the Kurtz and Allison prints to find. I'm not exaggerating, probably telling you something about my age, but it took me 40 years to locate this, sort of by accident. This is a picture donated by one of the people who have been very generous in donating prints of the collection. This is a picture of the crossing, more or less as it really happened. Again, this is the snapshot. This is an illustrator who's there, and there's Burnside. There's the pontoon bridges. Switching now to Winslow Homer, and what I'm doing in this section with you here are simply bringing you in touch with some of the famous artists of the time. Now, Winslow Homer was one of 3 young artists who began their careers on the battlefield. They were hired by either Leslie's Illustrated or by Harper's Weekly. And again, these guys weren't brought in to sit on a hillside a couple of miles away and write up their impressions. They were hired to be right down there where the action was taking place. Winslow Homer did not choose to be an ongoing Civil War artist. He had bigger things in mind, and I think most of you at one time or another have seen his more popular illustrations. But this is a great one that he did during the early part of the war. I have always assumed the war is on because you have sentries back here. But their men are ambivalent. They're around the fire. They're doing different things, different forms of evening activity. There's the moon. But it also gives you some indication of how most of the artists and the illustrators of the time, what their impression of what blacks did. Well, blacks are entertaining the troops. There is the young man dancing. Here's the fiddle player over here. This is also Winslow Homer. And this is rather fierce. Nobody's smiling. You see a lot of intensity. If you were to count the number of ways in which the bayonet is being used, swung around, there's probably 7 or 8 of them. I think I counted at least 6 or 7 different positions of the bayonet as they go hand to hand here. It's called the War for the Union. But he was there. Now then, next artist, F.O.C. Darley. And at one time I knew what all 3 of those first names are. Just say F.O.C. Darley. This tells a story. It's not just at the scene. There's too many different things going on. First of all, I have always felt that the principal thing that you look at, and where probably the detail is best shown, is in the slave family coming across the river from the plantation. If you notice the look of apprehension, of awe, hesitatingly crossing the tracks, symbolically crossing the tracks means coming into a different world where they will tail on to the army, leaving their homes, carrying their only possessions with them, the oxen, whatever they can haul along with them. In the meantime, the soldiers are doing a great job of carrying up the lines. They're burning the railroad ties over here, picking up the tracks, heating them, and bending them into what was called Sherman's neckties. In the meantime, what you can see, stretch out here far enough, 30 miles on either side of the track. The army was devastating the countryside, leaving nothing to the people who were there. It was Sherman's concept of total war. Not a wonderful thing, but as Grant and Sherman finally figured out, how are you going to really deal with this? And how are you going to bring the message home? Well, we're going to shut down all the supplies. We're going to make the people understand that this isn't a war just to be fought for the people who might be observing it or to make an impression on France or Britain anymore. This is a war for keeps. It's a young cavalry officer, don't know who he is, don't know who the regiment is, but he's overseeing everything. He's looking out there about 10 miles to see that the job's being done. Symbolically, the telegraph lines are coming down. What does that mean? It means all communication is lost now. And then this is a wonderful FOC Darley of immigrants moving west. And it tells a lot of different tales here. You're moving across a barren terrain. The dog is drinking up probably a little rainwater that's just fallen. The entire family, the Madonna and child figure back here, the classic Greek pose of the head of family, the scout riding up ahead, looking westward, always westward, and the long train of wagons that follow. This was in 1869, so it's when the movement west really had its one of its largest episodes. A few of these are Thomas Nast. You're all familiar with Thomas Nast, I think. Among other things, he created the modern Santa Claus, as we know it. But this is contrabands coming into our lines. Contrabands were what black slaves were called on the plantations, as a story that goes back in time. Another Thomas Nast taking over a plantation. The plantation owners are not particularly happy about that, but the troops are being welcomed. It's not altogether a flattering position in which Nast places African Americans. As time goes on, he does a more reasonable job, a better job of that. This, if I were going to show you one picture of this part of what was going on in 1864, and we had time to show only 2 or 3 pictures, this is one that I would include because it's a very powerful mast, telling us what's going to happen if Lincoln's Democratic opponent, George McClellan, wins the 1864 election. The platform on which he was running was to seek some sort of peace with the South. And I think the picture tells the story. Alfred Wood, one of the young illustrators who traveled with the Army. This is a piece that he did of blacks moving north after the war. And on the Southern Plains. This is the way the Army looked in 1860. It happens to be a Frederick Remington. It's a wonderful print. The same print hangs in the Frederick Remington Museum in Ogdensburg, New York. But this was the Army. There were 16,000 regulars in 1860 before Lincoln made the first call for 75,000 volunteers. And most of those were posted out west. And this cavalry didn't look an awful lot different than the ones 20 years later that was, and 10 years later, that was to create a lot of havoc in the Indian country. George. 4 generals. This is McClellan at Antietam. It's a wonderful portrait. It's a huge thing. He probably commissioned it. He was canned very shortly after this was created. But this is Lee at Chancellorsville, and notice that the similarity between how the horses are painted. They both took their lessons, both these artists took their lessons from the same French painter. But this is Lee's finest tactical victory at Chancellorsville, where with half the Union force, Stonewall Jackson made his famous ride around the Union Army and in a 2-day battle caused them to retreat. General Sherman marched to the sea, a tactical genius, and Ulysses S. Grant, about whom, in my opinion, not enough good things can be said. He was, without a doubt, the soldier genius of the Civil War. He understood what had to be done and how you go about doing it. He made the best possible use of the facilities that he had at hand. At Appomattox, he was a generous victor as president. He's had a couple of pretty bad raps, but he did his best with Reconstruction. I mean, to give a